Hi, Alex. So great to be here with you again.
Great to be here again, Scott. Very excited about the Martech for 2024 Summit.
Let's dive right in. Of the major trends that marketers are facing here coming into 2024, certainly one of them is the ascendance of first-party data. Where are marketers at in this journey?
Yeah, it's a really hot topic at the moment. I've been calling kind of third-party data the sort of the trans fatty acid of the industry, which I don't know how well that's gone over. But yeah, I think there's a real increasing understanding for marketers that third-party data is very problematic, that there's a lot of different trends, browser privacy trends, regulation trends that are trying to move the whole industry away from that and move folk towards first-party data that's collected and owned by brands and by publishers themselves. And I think marketers are waking up to that. I think there's still a bunch of people that kind of have their head in the sand, some vendors as well. But yeah, I think everyone's on a journey there.
Do you think people even appreciate what first-party data is or can be? Or, oh, first-party data, you mean like names and email addresses?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we've got to all do a bit more education on what it means, and really all the sort of more network plays that have been collecting third party, the death of the cookie. It's just a lot of jargon, right? And you've almost got these two separate worlds of the data world and like the modern data stack and a lot of the new stacks being built on top of cloud data warehouses. And then you've got the marketer ecosystem, cookie land, a lot of kind of browser-based technologies and things like that. And they're just not speaking the same language. And so I think as marketers are trying to move into the first-party data world, we all have a job to do to explain, what does it look like over here? What is first-party data?
Yeah, like when you look across the spectrum of all the possible touch points that an organization might have with its customers, with its audience, it's enormous, right? It's not just even what we would consider classic marketing touch points. Frankly, any touch point that we're having with a customer has the potential to give us some insight from a first-party data perspective, right?
Yeah, completely. So you've got contact center data. There's a lot going on with like connected TV. There's a lot going on with different backend systems, all sorts of stuff. So yeah, I think that the lens of what first-party data is really needs to be looked at, and a lot of silos, things like CRM systems, that all needs to be brought into the mix as well.
Yeah. So a big part of this is the web experiences we have, the mobile apps we have. I feel like web experiences continue to expand in their scope, the capabilities that they're able to deliver to prospects and customers. I guess my first question would be like, how good are we doing right now at actually collecting the data from those interactions?
Yeah, I think we're doing a good job. We could be doing a better job, and we're here at Snowplow to help brands to do that. I think there's an understanding that brands have been collecting this data. They've been doing event tracking for a very long time, but a lot of those technologies have been very like package based, and so the kind of the data's been held very captive in specific systems. I think the big trend over the last few years has been this rise of the data warehouse, data lakehouse, and the idea that a brand can now start to capture all that data in their own ecosystem, in their own like source of truth. And I think as they do that, with trends like AI and generative AI, now the question becomes, how good is that data? How rich is that data? How schematized? And yeah, just how powerful is that data? And how ready is it for AI? And so that's something that we're working on a lot at the moment, which is to kind of help brands to realize how valuable and how powerful this data is. Feature engineering and using it for like predictive modeling, detective consumer propensities and things like that. But yeah, we've got lots of work to do.
So a lot of this data, definitely we've had a fair amount of history of being able to leverage it from an analytical perspective, but are we starting to shift even further into being able to operationalize this data to feed it back in to the customer experience?
Yeah, I think so. So I think the first big trend there was the whole kind of reverse ETL movement that kicked off about 2 years ago now. And I think that made people realize that the data in the warehouse wasn't it wasn't an endpoint, it wasn't a cul-de-sac. It was an incredible place to build insights, but also to build rich behavioral profiles and then to activate them out into the downstream marketing channels and campaigns. And so I think that kind of unlocked the floodgates. And then I think the recent trend that's been adding to that is this idea of more and more tools becoming warehouse native. And so more and more like SaaS applications for marketers backing themselves onto Snowflake or Databricks or whatever. And so that idea really is quite powerful, because you move from all these tools having a shadow copy of the data to those tools literally using your like first party data nicely unified and put into your central source of truth, and then just putting kind of the front end for marketers on top of that data directly, which is really cool.
Yeah, no, it's really exciting to start to see this almost like a universal data layer starting to emerge. But this is it has both pros and cons to this shift of all this data now starting to live in one place. One question I'd love to get your perspective on is like, how do we have to think about this from a governance and compliance perspective as more of this data becomes accessible to us?
Yeah, that's a really hot topic. And I think what's interesting there is there's this growing consensus really across the kind of ecosystem of like Martech and data vendors that this is a much better architecture for doing compliance and doing governance and preserving the rights of data subjects. So I did a composable CDP webinar a few months ago, and every person on the panel, and they were from very different types of company, was unanimous that this idea of browser-side tag management and blitting customer behavioral signal out to loads of different endpoints from the front end was a terrible kind of wrong turn in the industry. And that the only place where the compliance tools are even being built now is really in the modern data stack on top of your data lake or data warehouse. And so I think this is the right architecture. And I think marketers are generally quite quickly waking up to, oh gosh, there was a lot of data leakage going on and a lot of kind of signal and proprietary information and private behavior, bluntly, was being sent out to these third parties. And we need to control that much more on the back end.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I guess, what are some of the other challenges that marketers face with this bounty that the cloud data warehouse is bringing us? Even from like a talent perspective, are they prepared to actually be able to harness this data, or are there capability gaps that need to be filled?
Yeah, I know you write a lot about this as well, Scott. I think capability gap is a good way of putting it. I think that the marketing folk are having to get much closer to the technology folk, the IT folk, the data folk. They're having to cross from cookie land into SQL land, so to speak. And I've talked about this. I think you've talked about it as well. Like, we need translators, we need these kind of marketing IT folk, these Martech folk to bridge the gap. And I think when an industry is trying to compose together best of breed tools to create these very differentiated outcomes, like that just takes more kind of expertise to bring these pieces together. The payoff is much bigger. But yeah, I think marketers are on a real journey to upskill and work with and collaborate with data teams and tech teams now. So it's a lot of new stuff for them.
How much of this do you think is like a shift in the actual ownership of some of these technologies? My perspective has been like, over the past decade or so, the Martech stack, as we call it, has largely been assembled and managed by marketers or marketing ops, marketing tech people, but they've been in the marketing department. I just saw there was a report a little while ago here from Gartner, which makes sense that as we have some of these technologies that frankly are a little bit more universal, their scope and their span is beyond just the marketing team. This is really bringing more of the IT or data organization into the position of being like the owners and the architects of that. How's this collaboration working? Is this like a new thing for marketing operations?
Yeah, I think it's very new in the enterprise. I think, like in a lot of things, the digital natives and the startup space led the way and had very integrated kind of IT and marketing and growth teams and data teams that have been joined at the hip working on this stuff and building like things like composable CDPs for years now. But yeah, I think it's very new in the enterprise, and I think you've got good reasons for it as well, Scott, in your material. I think that one of the reasons we're in this kind of unbundling phase and the technology folk are getting more involved is because some of the promises of those kind of all-in-one bundles, those kind of cloud offerings, just haven't really lived up to it. A lot of them were built off a lot of acquisitions that weren't that well integrated. And at some point, I think those organizations like I'm just going to pull this back into the warehouse and figure this out and do my identity stitch in there and get the best data in there and then do the activation from there. I think that's one reason. Like, what do you think of the other reasons, Scott? Like, you always have good takes on this.
I think you're right. And I definitely want to come back to this discussion about composability, because there's definitely an interesting shift happening there. But I think, yeah, there's a number of combinations. Some of it is actually economic value. Again, by having these technologies that exist at a layer that spans multiple departments. Yes, we still have to make certain like department specific investments in how we're leveraging these technologies, but the underlying infrastructure becomes something that's really a shared resource, a shared asset. And so economically, I think actually is very advantageous to marketers. I also think we were talking about from a talent perspective too, a downside of the isolated Martech stack was marketing also had to own all of the technical talent generally to support it. And again, don't get me wrong, it's been useful for marketers to be able to leverage that technology, but it was always a means to an end. Things focused on how does it drive growth in the business? How does it create these experiences for customers? And having to develop all this internal technical expertise may not have actually been the best, the ideal situation of, okay, what's where talent do we want in marketing? I think being able to draw upon more of that infrastructure level talent from IT as part of what's supporting marketing now, perhaps to a much greater extent than it was in this previous generation, feels like it's a net add.
Yeah, I think that's really astute. I think as well, like you're always one. I think the problem with a lot of the kind of more packaged approaches, which can be like fully owned by marketing, is you're always only one like market trend or technology trend away from needing that escape hatch anyway. And like generative AI is just a phenomenal example of that. Can you wait for this vendor or that vendor to fully embrace and put in the generative AI features you need in your business, which might be quite bespoke, versus if you're looking at like a peer organization that's been building up a very rich like data warehouse and central source of truth with like loads of customer data and first party data in it for a few years, and you're like, oh wow, they can just go and straight train an LLM on that, whereas I'm waiting for like my vendors to like finally put my Gen AI feature into their roadmap.
Yeah. So this actually gets us back then to the concept of composability. And you mentioned composable CDPs and the degree to which people want to pull things apart. It's interesting to me that historically there was like this dichotomy between build versus buy, but it feels like composability is almost a hybrid of these. I guess maybe we should start. What exactly is composability from like a marketer's perspective?
Yeah, I'm due an update post on this. I keep meaning to write another post on this. I think that, you called it, I think to me, a composable CDP or any kind of composable solution for marketers is something that's built out of best of breed components, some of which you buy, some of which might be open source, some of which you might build internally because they're differentiated. It's not one vendor product that, this is a composable X, so I can just buy this and all the composability is solved for me. So it means best of breed. It means integrating together different pieces. And I think what gets missed is one of the reasons that's so important in enterprise is because you're not changing all the different components of your stack at the same time. You have like different timeframes on different vendor relationships, different projects are in different parts of the life cycle. And so you need to be able to keep evolving forwards without changing everything at once. Those kind of replace everything projects often fail. So I think then the question becomes, well, what do you need in your vendors to be composable? And I think the thing we keep not talking about is interoperability. Like you have to have some level of interoperability between the different components. They have to play nice with each other. And I did a Substack post recently about your primary tag, your event collection has to be Switzerland. It has to play nice with all the downstream platforms, or else you're not going to get to that interop. You're not going to get to that composability. So I think there are other traits of composability as well. But yeah, I think we keep underplaying the interoperability point.
Yeah. In some ways is like I think of this as aggregation. There's types of aggregation happening very clearly here at the data where data layer with the cloud data warehouse. I guess, is that sort of interoperability that like, hey, listen, you can create data however you want. There's whatever pipeline here, but at the end of the day, you have to get into the cloud data warehouse. And once it's there, that is effectively an interoperable way of people being able to pull data out for other things.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that SQL and Spark have been the kind of the lingua franca of that interoperability so far, and those are good. I think we'll end up with other kind of primitives and protocols for standardization going forward, and we're definitely interested in contributing to those. So I think that's a big part of the composability story. Yeah, definitely, Scott.
How do you think this will impact the Martech market, at least over this next year or two? People are always asking me the question of, hey, Scott, is Martech going to consolidate anytime soon? And it's always a hard question to answer, but I would say, particularly with some of these trends underway right now with what's happening with AI, composability, what, if you had to take a guess, consolidate, not consolidate, why or why not?
Candidly, I think if the Gen AI piece hadn't happened, I think we could be starting to see consolidation again, in the sense that it would still be consolidation with the warehouse or the lakehouse as like the underlying fabric, but it would be people starting to say, no, actually, let's join more of these components together. The most important thing is it's warehouse native, but then on top of that, let's think about marketer ergonomics and reducing integration costs and all that kind of stuff. I think Gen AI is the big curveball, which is, because we don't know how that's going to play out, and because all these CMOs are being asked by their boards, what are you doing? What is the play here? What are the pilots you're running? That just means we're in a much more explorative phase, and you have to just stay working at the component level, working directly with the IT team and the data team and the data scientists, figuring out what do we want to do on top of this data inside the warehouse. So I think that's definitely pushed off like aggregation or rebundling by a few years.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. It's very hard to predict too far into the future here, just given the pace at which things are changing. But yeah, it sounds like there's a few principles here we can anchor to, and getting things to the cloud data warehouse is one. This has been awesome. Any parting advice you would want to pass along to marketers as they think about the year ahead?
Oh, Scott, that's a good question. I think stay agile. Do the experiments, get stuck into the experiments on Gen AI. I'm doing stuff myself. I'm learning. There's so much to learn. And I think just do it in phases, right? Crawl, walk, run. Don't try and do the huge replatform. Don't try and do the huge kind of company changing AI project. Just do it through incremental steps and use that time to get better acquainted with the IT and the data teams, because you guys are going to be working very closely together.
Wise advice. Thank you so much, Alex. Have a great year ahead.
It's been a pleasure.